John Romero.
I invited a lot of folks to this thing, and a lot of people weren't able to come, so I have a lot of gratitude to you people that are here. I felt kind of bad about it when, you know, I tried to tell people that we were meeting about 6 months ago so they could kind of mark it off on their calendar. But stuff happens, and a couple days ago I realized that's okay, you know. It's not about me, it's not about the main players in this, even though they all did their part to create something really, really neat. But it's about the future. It's about younger folks knowing about Joe. So I want to introduce Wilfred Romero, my boss, who's going to come up and say a few words and welcome you here.
Well, welcome. As Craig said, my name is Wilfred Romero. I'm the executive director of the ARC, and I'm very proud to be part of the ARC and also to be part of the chapter and the work that was done to recognize the injustices that are being done in our judicial system back in 1939, and it's still happening today. Some people may wonder, why are we here today? You know, this happened, you know, in 1939. The pardon happened in 2010, 2011. Why are we recognizing this? And I don't know if it was just coincidental or what it was about this story in itself and the history of it, but I'm originally from Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the area where Joe was arrested was actually the area where I grew up and was our playgrounds in those areas and by the train tracks. So I don't know, again, if it was coincidental that I'm here at this time or if it's just life in itself. But what I do know is that the work that was done isn't finished. It's basically our foundation. And Craig is absolutely right when he says that our younger generations need to know what happened in the past and what is happening today. As more individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are living in our communities, more and more of our jails are becoming beds for individuals with intellectual disabilities because of the way our criminal justice system deals with individuals with disabilities. And I think it's important for us not to be satisfied with the pardon, but to continue to push the work that was started here. And as I said before, the injustice still continues. If you go through your newspapers throughout the United States, you'll find more and more individuals with disabilities confessing to crimes that they did not commit. There's a lot of them. The techniques used by police officers to interrogate individuals are not in line with dealing with people with disabilities. A lot of the behaviors and the actions that a person displays when they're lying are also the actions or the body movements that individuals with autism will display. And because of that, we're seeing again more and more of our people being put in jail for crimes they did not commit. You know, I was taught as a young child that anything that you do, it's hard and it takes a lot of work to do to get there. This gate was just another opportunity to say, you know what, our work's not done, and this memorial today is worth its while. It took a little bit for us to get up here. Dennis put it in four-wheel drive and he made it up here, and that says a lot. That says a lot to the purpose behind this memorial. So again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and for making the trip all the way from Connecticut to be here with us today. For those who are coming from Trinidad, from Colorado Springs, Pueblo, all of those, thank you for being here. If we could just have a moment of silence to recognize Joe for the life that he lived, for the story that he's told, and for the history that's continued. For all of the Friends of Joe Arridy who made this possible, thank you. Again, just a moment of silence. Michelle will sing Amazing Grace.
Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch
actually had two messages that he wanted me to bring to you. And one of them was he wanted me to make sure that he told each and every one of you that he loves you very much. And the second message that he has asked me to bring to you was that the Pikes Peak Ark has such an amazing model of advocacy that what he's doing is he's imploring you at the Ark, the local Ark here, to put together your recipe for success. How is it that such a tiny little Ark here could lead to the point where Joe Arridy was exonerated, where Joe Arridy was declared innocent by the Governor of Colorado? So if you could put your model of advocacy in writing and share that recipe with every ARC and every advocacy group across the United States, it would be, greatly appreciated by the disability community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
So, why don't Dan Leonetti, you get up and say a few words. Come on.
I'm not much for words. I like to write. I like to say them. But I would say it's six years ago, perhaps, that I stood at this grave marker and I promised Joe I'd take a pardon. And my cousin Antonio brought up a lawyer, he's a good friend of ours named David Martinez, and that's where it all began. And he wanted to express his regrets and said that his heart and his thoughts are with you today, but he couldn't make it. He had other commitments. And the story don't end here. I'm going to try to get this made into a film, and I've been working hard on that. It needs to be a movie so that people can see the story of Joe all over the world. And Michigan Caller is going to take it to HBO. The studio's going, they're not interested in this kind of story, so she's going to take that to HBO. I just found that out, and I think it'd be a good home for it. And not very far from here, Joe was the happiest man to live on death row. Those were his happiest days. He had his toy train, he had his toys, his coloring books, and he was happy till the day they came and got him. And I know he would forgive these people for the trespasses against him, because he had such a good and kind soul. And I'll make a promise, I'm going to try to get the story to film. And I want to thank all of you for being here.
Thank you, Dan.
Mike, you want to say a few words?
My name is Mike Radlett. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I first heard about Joe Arridy, who I mispronounced his name, Arridy, back in the early 1990s when I got a phone call from a close friend named Watt Espy. And Watt had just been contacted by Bob Perske about the poem. And Watt succeeded in identifying the poem to the person. And at that time I was writing a lot on erroneous convictions in the United States, and we were just beginning to realize that one of the causes of wrongful convictions is false confession. Certainly not the only, but we continue to learn more and more about that issue today. But standing back there, I'm reminded not only of Joe's story, but the other grave markers around here. Many of these people were themselves executed. I've written about the history of the death penalty in Colorado, and I noticed the license plate here for George Honda. George was born in Japan. He and his wife operated a Chinese restaurant in Denver. Japan, China, what the heck, made no difference. And they got into an argument one day, just a domestic argument about they had to handwrite the menus, and that was the cause of the argument. And Mr. Honda ended up killing his wife. It's not a death penalty case by any measure. Domestic quarrels are not cause for death penalty, especially in the case of successful business people. But this is in the midst of World War II, and George Honda was tried in that atmosphere of anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States, and after a perfunctory trial and no appeal, That's why he's on the ground today. And there's similar stories up and down these rows of people, most of whom were guilty, most of whom probably killed somebody. But had they had the quality of the attorney like Gail Ireland back in the day, had people been more receptive not only to developmentally disabled disabilities, but also to mental illness. You see that battle being fought today in James Holmes' case in the Aurora Theater. You see that battle about developmentally disabled among a person who's scheduled to be executed in Florida on June 12th. There was just a case a week ago. The U.S. Supreme Court finally decided that Florida's criterion for executing people with developmentally disabled, the criterion had been that if your IQ is 72, you live. And if your IQ is 70, you die. And the Supreme Court, in a closely divided court, 5-4, finally threw that out and said it's a multi-dimensional measure of what constitutes mental disabilities. And indeed, for the first time, instead of using the term mental retardation, they use the term developmentally disabilities. So the battles that put Joe Arridy in the ground here in 1939 are still being fought on many fronts today by many anonymous people who are still working 15 hours a day like Gail Ireland, doing their best to make sure that pretty soon that penalty will be relegated to the American wastebasket. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bryce Trowbridge, everybody. The retired poet laureate of the Pikes Peak region.
Happy to be here again. The first time I came here was just through a serendipitous meeting with Craig, and we got reacquainted, and he brought me Perske's powerful book. I devoured it, and then the screenplay by Dan, the filmmaker, and so I was moved and happy to be a part of that early visit here. I realized I had been here as a young child. My grandfather was a sheriff out of Norton, Kansas, and came to the Springs, and then for a while he lived in Cañon City, and he brought me over here to Woodpecker Hill. Is that what this is called, Woodpecker Hill?
Yeah.
But anyway, he was living in the Springs actually in the 30s. My mother had just graduated in 37, and all of those stories my relatives knew about. In 1939, while in January 39, while Joe was being put into the ground without a proper headstone, William Butler Yeats died that same month. And W.H. Auden gave his memorial poem in memory of W.B. Yeats, and he said, you know, Earth receive an honored guest. William Yeats has gone to rest. And the last lines of that poem, he said, in the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise, and with the carving of a verse, make a vineyard of each curse. And so that fits so well this situation. It just makes me think of how, well, there's another poet laureate that comes to mind. He's deceased now, but more recent, Yehuda Amichai. He was the poet laureate of Israel. But there's just some lines I read once in a New Yorker magazine. It says, out of 3 or 4 in a room, one is forced to, let's say, out of 3 or 4 in a room, one is always looking out the window, forced to see the injustice amongst the thorns, fires on the hill, men who left whole, brought home in the evening like small change. That's just some of the words that make me think of this incident. And then you've got Auden. He said, he said, our operatics will continue to make the same squalid mess called history. All we can pray for is artists, chefs, and saints up here to blithe it. So you have these artists, chefs, and saints, filmmakers, people that keep this alive and make a vineyard of each curse and keep it at the height of human consciousness so we can move forward through the legal systems, all the hard work behind the scenes that scholars do, and the good lawyer Ireland, citizen lawyer. So I'm happy to be here. I just think that it all started with the poem that Susan read, and there's a little saying by Novellis, who was a writer in the 1700s, beauty, let's see, poetry heals the wounds inflicted by reason. So beauty's voice cries out in the wilderness, summoning art to clear away the scattered stones that block our way, purging frustrations, turbid emotions, taming to art tumultuous oceans. So he's been an influence from all those years gone by. It comes out of the ground, the voice of this space, and moves us all forward. So if Joe was here, as happy as he was playing with those trains, I know he'd just say, I forgive everything and all the wrongs, you know, I forgive, and bless you all, and happiness to you in your lives. So I'll just close with the poem. It's a boomerang I'll throw into the wind. The love that soars out from you returns from the arms of the singing wind. Thank you.
Hey.
Anybody else in the crowd who would like to come up and say a few words, speak from the heart?
I'm Christina from the ARC. Very proud to be a member and staff member of the ARC. And I know Craig said this wasn't about him, but I'd like to recognize Craig. In January, he celebrated 20 years of service to the ARC and has been the champion for Joe. He's been the glue that brought us all together. And so I know it's not about him, but he's very instrumental in keeping Joe's story alive. So I just wanted to thank Craig for bringing us together.
Restaurant. I met a man who makes meals at a restaurant where there's no menu, but everything's on it. Impossible, I know. But I met a man who makes meals at a restaurant called Death Row. I met a man who makes the last meals, and I know way too many people who would attack him, asking how it feels to be a part of something like that. So instead we just chew the fat and I listen. He tells me about a 31-year-old boy, who was sentenced at the age of 22, waited 9 years on death row, and last week was his turn. So he asked for sourdough French toast and a side of magic beans, because a boy would rather face down a giant, rather take his chances with a beanstalk than walk down that hall where every footfall echoes into that same oblivion, where every experience never had congregates to create a world he never lived in, where a boy could find himself asking for themes like magic beans, and a cook could find himself understanding what it means to be desperate. He tells me that most of his food never gets touched. That doesn't stop him from being exact, even though the fact is that he could never make a meal as good as Mom could. It'll never taste as good as it would coming from the one who raised you, and he knows this, but he's meticulous, even though he knows that this 31-year-old boy grabbed his arresting officer's service revolver, tried to use it as a problem solver. He knows this, but he makes French toast with sourdough as though he was cooking for a king, because the last thing you should do is eat well. Especially if there's a family praying that you have to go slow when you take that walk through hell, so everything's fresh and the eggs are free range, and there's a last minute change of pans because the last hands to wash that pan missed a spot, and this cook has a vision of French toast that falls apart so softly. It feels like lovers lying in bed, breaking apart to sleep so deeply, the shallow of their dreams is enough for hate to drown in. Because if you're going to come up short on a request like magic beans, you better be sure that the first part of that meal means something. He tells me It's a job, and as cliche as it sounds, someone's got to do it. Tells me that back in the day they used to let mothers try, but most of them couldn't get through it. So a job was born out of necessity, and those struck by poverty didn't have false visions of turning this work into their legacy. They didn't dream of a dynasty where the mountains were made of chocolate or sugar stood for sand, but they knew America would put a check in their hands. So men and women were born into workers because ideas like right and wrong get weighed by need anytime there's a mouth to feed. He tells me that America failed, that they nailed freedom to a cross because every boss and every office is its own separate world, having to be held up by the backs of employees expected to say please every time they need. I know way too many people who would tell me it can't go on like this. And we say this, but we still set our alarms to be up in time for our 9 to 5. We're just reporters coming to you live from bus stops and coffee shops. We wear our lives like costumes and use bills and coins like props in an over-budget production that we cannot seem to stop. So it just goes on like this, as if we accept this, as if we've all become Buddhas of mass production, our brains rotting like teeth under the sweet, unending bliss of false enlightenment. And he tells me that maybe we used to be flint, and we'd spark when struck by new ideas, but now all there is jobs, and someone's got to do them. And isn't he lucky that he lives in a country where everyone wants to become someone? And isn't he lucky that when the day's done, he can go home and forget like he played this hand, knowing it was a bad bet, because what you risk reveals what you value. And this man ventured everything he knew, to the point where his wife cannot convince him that her eyes are still the color blue. What life have you got left if you want no one to know what you do? See, he lets everyone think that he's just a cook because he doesn't want his kids to know what daddy does, and he's unable to tell his mother where he was when they executed a 31-year-old boy for killing the first son of the same mother. He made the last meal for the man who took his brother because he would not trust it to anyone who was willing to fill in for him that day, because they'd say things like, "Don't worry," with just enough of a smile that if they ever took trial trying to defend that meal, all they'd ever feel was guilty. So he made French toast with sourdough, as though he was making a monument to his virtues that would never be bought down by the half-truths of America. The meal never got touched. And he tells me that when the skeletons in his closet finally bust down the door, all he'll need is his fist in someone's jaw, because regret is like living your life as a blind man, having to imagine everything you lived but never saw. He can't picture it any different than his own mother at an execution, sitting in the front row, clear tears mixing with blush and eyeshadow, looking as though she'd been punched by a rainbow. But he says, "I know I did the right thing." And no one will ever sing his praise, raise a big deal made of granite or concrete. America will never fall at his feet and say, "I'm sorry." All this is the story of a man who makes meals, and one day he made a testament to his ethics, golden brown and stacked a perfect 5 inches high. He tells me he feels bad for the boys on death row who know America failed them. He says most of them still ask for apple pie.
Anybody else want to speak from the cause?
Yeah. I'd like to play a little bit of music for Joe today. You know, I don't know anybody in my 60 years on this planet Earth that doesn't agree with me when I say that music is a healing force in the world. Anybody who's studied or come across any of the writings of quantum physics, you know that sound and frequency, the frequency of love is probably the greatest force in all of creation. So today we pray in this way: Takashva, Wankatanka, Grandfather, Great Spirit, Great Mystery, you were first. And we thank you for this Uchoni Washte, this beautiful life that you have given us, and the beautiful life that you gave our brother Joe. We pray that his life wasn't in vain, that we as people in positions of trust and people who are visible in our communities, that we use Joe's life as an example for those to learn and to make this a better place for all of us to live in, and our children and our grandchildren, and for those generations to come. And at this point, we would like to thank our ancestors who came before us, because if it wasn't for their strength and their wisdom and their perseverance, we wouldn't be here. So thank you, Joe. You paid a price that I don't think any of us would ever want to pay. So we thank you for your life, Joe. This man. Again, Wilfred Romero, Executive Director of the ARC.
Antonio Sanchez. I'm related to Dan Leonetti, and very proud to have been part of the effort to get the pardon for Joe.
John Romero, Johnny Safe Records, Denver, Colorado.
Mike Radley, University of Colorado.
Carlos Guevara, cynical journalist who's learned not to be quite so cynical after looking at human beings through this camera lens over the years doing this Joe Arridy project. It was a very humbling experience for me, by the way, to see that there are actual human beings that do care for other fellow human beings. But I'm an independent filmmaker. My brother Dan, my cousin over there. It's really been a privilege and an honor to be around all of you folks.
John Farrow, from the start of this, been there ever since.
Dan Leonetti,
Connie Cipriano, Dan's sister. Lily Ramirez, Dan's sister. Donna Leonetti, Dan's other sister.
Oh, I'm Stuart Anderson. I'm a former staff wrestler.
Jen Woolsey, I'm Administrative Assistant and Director of First Impressions at Argument Investigation.
Denise Thacker, I'm mother of Michelle Thacker, home health care nurse for Craig's mom.
Nice.
Kelvin Benjamin, I'm my boyfriend. I'm here for some more sport.
Mike Lane, Country Reds. Cloudy, fan of y'all.
Penny Sterling, volunteer.
I'm Craig Severa, and I'm just a man.
Arthur Werf, Member Reporter Director of Arc and Secretary Reed.
Christina Becerra, the Director of the Guardianship Program for the Guard.
Anne Tremendous, attorney and also colleague to Bob Perske.
Bryce Strobridge, Colorado Springs, Cola.
Dennis Wynn, I get services in Colorado Springs, Florida. We continue to fight.
What class are there?
Right, once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Remind you that there is a little get-together at Tom's house after this is over, so we hope to see each and every one of you there. In ending, Michelle is going to sing People Get Ready.
People get ready, there's a train a-coming. Don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesel coming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. People get ready for the train to Jordan, picking up passengers from coast to coast. Faith is the key, open the doors and board 'em. There's hope for all among those who love the most. So people get ready, there's a train a-coming. Don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord.
Amen. Thank you, Michelle. That concludes our memorial service. Friends of Joe Arridy, once again, thank you very much. Our work is not done. We still have a lot to go. So again, anything worthwhile takes some effort. Thank you for coming. Have a safe walk back down the hill, and we'll see you at Mr. Garcia's house. You, brother.
You should tell them that's primo to you.
Yeah. They were from Romeroville.
Pictures came out right in line. Because I noticed looking back at them that I have black streaks.
That would be under your name. It should say ISO. Let's go to. You have a meeting, right?
Yeah.
Good job, Dennis.
She's got an input. She's so powerful. I want to inspire higher.
This man inspires me.
You know what, Denise? I have them in my truck.
It was hard.
When we get down the hill, I'll give you some of that, some instructions. All right, Dennis, shall we try it? Kick the big rocks out of the way. Talk about that.
24 years ago,
I do have
came up to Milwaukee
Garcia's house at the truck,
and
if anybody needs that.
did our wedding. She was our matchmaker. My wife was working.
Huh. All stories of that process.
Yeah. I gotta get my editing back on.